Today we're talking about Brexit and its effects on cultural life in Britain and beyond.
Now, as France 24's Culture and Europe editor, it's of course a subject that's close to both of our hearts.
So when we found out that 4 mega British authors had teamed up to go on a European charm offensive, we decided to team up to interview them.
Well, let's go then and introduce you to 4 rock stars of British literature.
Brexit means Brexit.
Should have thought, Nigel. Up there.
Hello there to Ken Follett and Jojo Moyes, as well as on the other side, Lee Child and Kate Mosse. Hi.
Hi.
Thanks to the Friendship Tour team to come in to see us.
Pleasure.
It's a real pleasure to have you. Now, I just want to start off by asking you to introduce the person next to you.
The person next to me is terrifying. Lee Child. Every event we've done, he's threatened to punch somebody.
True.
That's true.
This is Kate Mosse with a brain the size of a planet, completely intimidating.
This is Ken Follett, the instigator of all the mischief, the tour, and the most stylish man in show business, and a billion-selling historical fiction writer.
And this is Jojo Moyes, who wrote a book that absolutely ravished me called Me Before You. It was, I think, her first bestseller, huge bestseller. She then wrote the movie, huge success as a movie, and it's been up and up since then.
Clearly a lot of friendship between the 4 of you. A lot of warm feelings towards Europe as well. Like we said, it's a European charm offensive. So just interested to know how Europe has shaped you all sort of personally and creatively, Ken.
Well, first of all, we all stand on the shoulders of great writers of the past. And the first novel ever written is a Spanish novel called Don Quixote. That was published in the first decade of the 17th century. We also have all read and benefited from all the great French novelists. My particular favourite is Victor Hugo. Our work depends on this very rich inheritance that we've all had from European novelists.
Lots of nodding around the table. Lee, you're based in the United States and you write a lot about American cities with your Jack Reacher novels that are based in the US. Where does Europe come into it for you?
For my generation of British people, Europe was the first stop. We felt it was an easy transition moving outward into Europe. We were welcomed there. We were happy to go there. There was a lot of back and forth with European people. And that eases you into a sense that it is more than just you. It is more than just your hometown. It is more than just your home nation. The world is out there. And what worries me about Brexit is kids are going to think that the world stops at the English Channel. They won't see as far as we saw.
And Kate, it's a big part of your books, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, all of my historical fiction are love letters to Carcassonne and Toulouse and Languedoc. But I think it's also the idea for me that stories know no borders. Countries are porous and they've changed their shape over many, many hundreds of years, thousands of years. And so the idea that we belong on one side and everybody else is on the other is just historically wrong.
Jojo.
4 of my books are set in France, or partly set in France. I just consider myself to have absorbed European and especially French culture almost via osmosis since I was very small, because it never felt like there was much of a border. I mean, I remember I was one of the first generations to be able to use the Eurostar. So really, Europe for us is just getting on another train.
And you guys are wrapping up this friendship tour. Ken, it was your idea. You've been taking in Milan, Madrid, Berlin, and finally Paris. Why did you want to go on this tour and bring these 3 with you?
Just questioning that now.
That is a good question.
He's regretting it now.
Yeah.
Well, we all have millions of readers in other European countries who read us in their own languages, in translation. And we're really pleased to have those readers. You know, it's very flattering. And then suddenly our country started to say, no, we don't like you. We don't want to be in your club. We're all right on our own. And we're embarrassed. And we don't want these people who are so kind as to read our books, we don't want them to think that we're part of that rejection of our European neighbours. And it was that embarrassment that made me think, what can I do about it? Maybe I could get some other writers to come with me and we'll go around Europe and we'll say to our readers, we still love you.
Well, as we all know, since 2016 and the referendum, all kinds of aspects of Brexit have been analysed from top to bottom, from immigration to the border with Ireland. But what about the consequences for Britain's creative sector? The France 24 Europe team has pulled together a few key facts and figures.
Britain has long been a proud exporter of arts and culture, from Shakespeare to the Spice Girls. A sector that's worth over £84 billion to the UK economy, or around €100 billion. According to the Arts Council England, cultural organisations received £345 million from the European Union between 2007 and 2016. The main source of EU cultural funding is known as Creative Europe. In 2017, it paid out over €19 million to projects based in the UK. It's contributed to everything from a Stephen Hawking's documentary, a portrait exhibition starring Rembrandt and Andy Warhol, and the Leeds International Film Festival. In 2016, the UK government said it would guarantee support for some EU-funded projects, despite reducing arts funding by £1 billion over the past decade. But direct funding from the EU is only part of the story. Once Brexit is carried out, the UK won't be able to take part in schemes such as the European Capitals of Culture. When Liverpool was chosen in 2008, it saw an extra 9.7 million visitors and a £750 million injection into the local economy. And while London's cultural status may take a knock, regions outside of the capital look set to lose out the most post-Brexit. The North East already reporting a 14% fall in EU cultural collaborations since the referendum. The movement of talent between the UK and Europe could also be impacted after Brexit, with touring musicians and artists potentially needing visas and authorisations for their instruments.
So there we go. Now, the UK government has actually said that it will guarantee funding for projects that already have European funding currently. The Arts Council for England has also said that it thinks Brexit could open up these new opportunities for British creatives outside the EU. There is a world outside the EU, of course. So what will change for you when it comes to culture when Britain leaves?
We're very lucky because we're novelists and our books go into lots and lots of languages and we have millions of readers reading in any language that they choose. But in terms of the exchange of creativity, it's simply not good enough when the government says it's going to guarantee it. There won't be any money. And actually, the regeneration that's come both from Liverpool, but particularly most recently through Hull, has been quite astonishing. And if every single brilliant European director, brilliant European choreographer, musicians have to apply for a visa every time they want to come, they simply won't come.
A great European orchestra at the moment can just arrive. And in the future, it'll be the same as I see in America, which is they need visas, they need professional visas, they've got to make tax arrangements. All of these tiny things are going to add up to people saying, you know what, we just won't bother.
Jojo, not long after the referendum, you said that Brexit is an error. You would like to stop it. Of course, half the people, more than half the people that voted to leave. 3.5 years on from the referendum, what would you say to a Leave voter at this point?
I'd ask them if they still felt the same way, because what's interesting is how many people wouldn't vote the same way a second time. I think we voted, or people who voted Leave generally voted for an idea, and now that the specifics have proven so impossible. I think Lee was saying somebody described it as trying to take the eggs out of a baked cake. It's an almost impossible thing to do. It's going to take years. It's a colossal act of self-harm that's going to cost a fortune. And I think most people have understood that. And even people who are passionate Leavers find it very hard to justify it on anything other than an ideological level.
Okay, well, for many British artists, their country's political climate has been at the heart of conversation since the referendum. Take a listen.
Brexit.
Exciting. Most people didn't even give a about the EU before the referendum.
This whole Brexit thing is it's like being on a slow suicide mission.
The Brexit debate was a phony debate. It was two choices between two versions of the right wing.
I'm very saddened by what's happening, and that these men, Boris and these other world leaders, are getting away with what they're getting away with.
Now we have politicians talking about how they might break the law, or how if a law applies but they don't like it, they'll just somehow get round it.
Now, there was a novel that came out pretty quickly after the referendum by Ali Smith. It's called Autumn, and it was heralded as the first great Brexit novel. We've got a quote for you. All across the country, people felt it was the wrong thing. All across the country, people felt it was the right thing. All across the country, people felt they'd really lost. All across the country, people felt they'd really won.
So politics in chaos, a society divided, a loss of faith in democracy. But writers have been talking about these things for ages, haven't they? For years. Shakespeare, Charles Dickens, John Buchan's 1915, The 39 Steps, a story about saving England from Europe. Are things really different this time?
They're different in as much as this is not really about any one specific thing. It's not really about the Brexit or the EU. It was about people after 8 years of political austerity. People were just angry. And whatever question had been asked, they would have answered in a hostile and negative way. It's our bad luck that the question was about the European Union. It could have been about something completely different. It could have been about the death penalty, or should we continue in the Champions League? It could have been anything. The reaction would have been hostile and negative.
We have damaged our own country's prosperity, and we will spend years trying to put this right. And it doesn't matter now what you voted, it doesn't matter what anybody voted, the damage is already being done. And it is an extraordinary thing for a country that has so much to have actively put itself essentially on a war footing. And the language used is very extraordinary. So, of course, you're right. I write historical fiction, and I'm writing about these things all the time, when one country goes against another country. But essentially, this is civil war.
OK, well, last week, the American writer Harlan Coben was on the show, and he had a question for you.
Oh, yes.
Hi, Jojo, Lee, Ken, and Kate. Thank you very much for doing this wonderful tour. My question to you guys is, how are these current events, the ones you're talking about, going to affect your writing? How is it going to affect the next book that you guys work on? Thanks.
They already did affect my latest book, but not in an obvious way. I mean, my latest book is about pack horse librarians in Kentucky, which seems like a very niche subject. But what it is actually my most political book. And it's about fear of the outsider. It's about how people react to an outsider. It's about cutting yourself off from people. It's about pushing back against corporate rape of the land. It's about big business versus the small man. And so, weirdly, I think even if we're not aware of it at the time, all these things feed through into our fiction, perhaps in Kate and Ken's case more obviously because you write about grand geopolitical events.
Would any of you be tempted or thinking about writing a book that's overtly about Brexit?
It's such a toxic word at the moment. In England, people are so sick of the word. I think it would kill your book sales stone dead.
I don't think I'd buy one. I don't think I'd bear it.
One of the reasons that we're loving this tour and it's been so successful is that people's minds are made up. So non-fiction, it's very, very difficult. And when you put the word Brexit in anything, people know what they think. But with a novel, you see, we're stealthy. We kind of sneak in. And that's the point about reading fiction. So, my latest one, like Jojo's, is, The Burning Chambers, La Cité au Feu, is about the Huguenot Wars beginning. And what's that about? A country that decided to turn on some of its citizens and in the act of doing so, destroyed the country. Now, you can't get much closer in a way than that. But nobody wants to read a Brexit novel and it's too soon. 10 years' time, we'll know what it means.
All the Reacher books are about Reacher versus the big guy behind the scenes. And that is really what I think is interesting about Brexit. I mean, who is pushing it and why? I mean, who is going to benefit? And that's the guy Reacher would be going after.
And Ken, I just wanted to ask you, you're married to Barbara Follett, the former Labour MP for Stevenage. So you've got a particular insight into UK politics. Now, there's an election coming up that's highlighted just how divided Britain is. Can these divisions be healed?
I can't see it because the old divisions between left and right, Labour and Conservative, are melting away. And there are people in what are thought of as safe Labour seats or safe Conservative seats who are probably going to lose because enough of their voters dislike their attitude on Brexit, whether it's Remain or Leave. So I think there's going to be quite a lot of upset in this coming election.
Now, I want to ask each of you the best book title to describe this moment in time?
Deception.
A long road to hell.
And how would you feature Boris Johnson?
He'd be the comic relief.
He's the awful first boyfriend you'd rather forget.
I think of him as the third child of a rich person who spends all his time eating, and when he's called upon to save the castle, he runs away.
He would be the fat bully that goes down easily in chapter 1.
If only that had happened.
I like the way that you didn't have your titles, but you had that answer right up your sleeve. Okay, and we're going to end the show now with a collective story, aka the game Consequences. And I'm going to give you the title. Kat's going to start. It's called Brexit, a novel.
Okay, I've got the first line for you, and we're going to go around the table and tell the story between us. So, once upon a time, there was a kingdom. It was a united kingdom. But one day, Ken, the people became divided.
And then a man came through the door with a gun in his hand.
Ooh. And said, just bang your heads together or I'll bang them off.
And somebody remembered years ago where a currency speculator made a fortune out of chaos.
And everybody said, guys, we're going to start again because you're not delivering your lines properly and the soundtrack doesn't work. Back to the beginning.
And then the end comes up on screen.
Yes.
Okay. How will that do for a Brexit novel?
I think it maybe won't sell too well.
No.
Iffy, very iffy.
But it's about as chaotic as the real thing.
Yes.
Well, thank you all so much for coming in and being our guests today on France 24. Ken Follett, Jojo, Moyes, Lee Child and Kate Mosse. Thank you all.
Thank you for the invitation.
And a reminder for you guys at home of your latest books, Ken Follett's Notre Dame, A Short History of the Meaning of Cathedrals, Kate Moss's The Burning Chambers, Jojo Moyes, The Giver of Stars, and Lee Child's Blue Moon are available now.
And a political reminder, as I am Europe editor, Britain's general election is taking place on 12th of December and it will be decisive for Brexit. The Brexit deadline itself, as we know, is currently the 31st of January.
Thank you everyone for joining us. Keep watching for the next chapter.